And what we're seeing is a lack of leadership, a lack of, from the outside, I will say.
The WNBA commissioner just released a written statement and refused to speak to the media. Refused. On the night when the entire basketball world was watching, waiting for leadership. Cathy Engelbert went silent, and that silence tells you everything you need to know about how this league actually feels about Caitlin Clark. Welcome back. This is RM Run, and today we are documenting the moment the WNBA's leadership vacuum became completely, brutally, undeniably impossible to ignore.
Basketball, and I don't care if Cathy does put out a statement, it's just a piece of paper. You need to be at that game tonight.
Let me set the table for every single person watching this video, because the full picture here is more alarming than the headlines suggest. We are not talking about one bad night. We are not talking about a single controversial play that got out of hand. We are talking about a structural collapse, a failure of governance that has been building for months, and that the people who run this league have refused to address with any urgency, any clarity, or any visible backbone whatsoever. Caitlin Clark is the most watched player in the history of this league. She has driven attendance records, television ratings, merchandise sales, and cultural conversations that the WNBA has been trying to generate for nearly 30 years. And what has the league office given her in return? Night after night of physical punishment on the court, a coaching staff placed in an impossible political position, a fan base that has been allowed to turn toxic on both sides, and a commissioner who, on the night when a statement was most urgently needed, chose to issue a press release and hide from cameras. That is not leadership. That is the opposite of leadership. And the people who have been defending this league's front office with every available excuse have officially run out of road.
Because the officiating has not met the level and caliber of athletes in.
Here is exactly what happened, and I want you to hold every single detail in your mind as we go through this, because the pattern is undeniable. The commissioner was present for a press availability. Reporters were assembled, cameras were rolling. The entire media ecosystem was pointed directly at Cathy Engelbert, waiting for her to address the escalating situation around Caitlin Clark, the physical targeting, the player safety concerns, the rule changes that have already been implemented, the death threats being directed at other players in this league, and the absolute chaos that has consumed the public conversation around the WNBA for weeks. And what did Cathy Engelbert do? She issued a written statement. She declared herself unavailable for questions. She will make a decision, the reporters were told, but she will not take questions. Not tonight. The commissioner of a professional sports league, in the middle of the most significant controversy her league has faced in its modern era, looked at the assembled press corps and said, "I have nothing to say to you. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss it." The commissioner of the WNBA refused to take questions on the night when every single person watching this sport needed to hear from her directly. That is the fact. That is the receipt. That is the abdication. Now, I want to be completely clear about what that silence communicates. When a leader goes quiet at the exact moment their voice is most needed, they are not being strategic. They are not playing the long game. They are telling you through their absence exactly how much they value the person at the center of the storm. Cathy Engelbert's silence on Caitlin Clark's situation is not neutral. Silence in a moment like this is a message, and the message is brutal. The people in the media who have been closest to this situation, analysts, former coaches, former players, they see it too. And the most damning assessment of Engelbert's leadership failure did not come from an anonymous source or a hot take merchant. It came from someone with direct knowledge of what organizational leadership is supposed to look like. Don't take my word for it. Here is exactly what was said, on camera, about the commissioner's decision to go dark.
And what we're seeing is a lack of leadership, a lack of, from the outside, I will say.
She said it, with cameras rolling. It starts at the top and it trickles down. That is the verdict on Cathy Engelbert's leadership from someone who studies organizational structure. And what is trickling down right now is a lack of empathy, a lack of consequences, and a complete absence of the ethical backbone this league has claimed for 30 years as its foundation. Let that sink in for 1 second, because what comes next is even more alarming.
Basketball, and I don't care if Cathy does put out a statement, it's just a piece of paper. You need to be at that game tonight.
Let us talk about the tactical failure first, because that is where this whole thing begins to unravel. The WNBA has already changed its rules in response to what has been happening around Caitlin Clark. The freedom of motion enforcement, which analysts and insiders are now openly calling a Caitlin Clark rule, is already on the books. It is already being applied. Clark is already getting whistled for the two-handed push-off she uses to create space. The rule is already in place, and yet the people who are most resistant to acknowledging the physical targeting of Caitlin Clark, the former players, the old guard voices, the corners of media that have been loudest in their hostility toward Clark's presence in this league, those same people are now standing up and saying, "What more do you want?" Short of wrapping her in bubble wrap and sending her down the floor, they are asking, what more protection could possibly happen in a contact sport? I want you to sit with that framing for a moment, because it is extraordinary. The rule has already been changed. The league has already acknowledged, through its own officiating adjustments, that something was wrong with how Clark was being treated on the court. And the response from the old guard is to mock the very idea of player protection by invoking bubble wrap. That is not a good faith argument. That is a deflection. That is the establishment circling the wagons and hoping you do not notice that the rule change itself is the admission. Here is the second layer of this failure, and it is the one that nobody on television wants to say out loud. Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever head coach, has been placed in an impossible situation, and that impossible situation was created entirely by the commissioner's failure to lead. Think about what Stephanie White is navigating right now. She is the head coach of the player at the center of the biggest controversy in women's basketball. If she defends Caitlin Clark publicly, one faction of the basketball world attacks her for being Clark's protector. If she does not defend Clark publicly, another faction attacks her for abandoning her star player. She cannot win. She cannot say the right thing. And the reason she cannot win is because the person at the top of this league never established a clear, consistent, ethical standard for how players are supposed to be treated, and then enforced it with consequences. That is not Stephanie White's fault. That is Cathy Engelbert's fault. Completely. Ruthlessly. Undeniably. The pattern of behavior here is not new. This is not the first time the league office has gone quiet when a difficult conversation needed to be had. The transcript of what insiders are saying about Engelbert's relationship with the players and coaches in this league is devastating. The accusation, and it is being made by people with direct knowledge, is that Engelbert does not have the kind of relationship with the people in this league where she can simply pick up the phone, call a player or a coach, and say, "Hey, what is going on? How can I help you?" That relationship does not exist, and when it does not exist, what you get is exactly what we are watching right now. You get players publicly at war with each other's fan bases. You get coaches stuck in no-win political situations. You get a commissioner issuing written statements and hiding from cameras on the biggest night of the season.
Because the officiating has not met the level and caliber of athletes in.
Now let us talk about the enabler Complicity, because Cathy Engelbert did not create this vacuum alone. The old guard, the former players, the voices who have been loudest in their resistance to Caitlin Clark's arrival in this league, they have been active participants in the deterioration of the environment around her. And the Sophie Cunningham situation is the most glaring, most undeniable proof of the double standard that is eating this league alive. When Sophie Cunningham delivered a brutal, reckless hit on J.C. Sheldon, the response from a significant portion of the WNBA's fan base was not outrage. It was celebration. T-shirts were printed. T-shirts in support of the enforcer. Sophie Cunningham's social media following jumped into the millions. The Indiana Fever fan base applauded what happened, and the league office, Cathy Engelbert's league office, did not come out with a strong, unambiguous statement about player safety in the immediate aftermath of that incident. Now flip the script. Imagine that same hit happening to a player who was not Caitlin Clark. Imagine the silence from the league office. Imagine the t-shirts being printed in support of the person who delivered the blow. The social impact of that scenario, who gets celebrated and who gets protected, who gets t-shirts and who gets death threats, that is not a basketball question. That was said directly by people who have been watching this situation closely. This has nothing to do with basketball. It just happens to be where the pressure is being applied. And here is the cost to Caitlin Clark specifically, because that is the part of this story that gets lost in the noise. Clark is a professional athlete who came into this league with enormous resources, enormous visibility, and enormous leverage. The argument being made by people who understand the financial reality of this situation is not subtle. If Caitlin Clark walked away from the WNBA tomorrow, and she has the resources and the options to make that choice, the damage to this league would be catastrophic and potentially irreversible. Not because Clark is the only talented player in this league, she is not. But because of what her departure would signal to every future superstar, every future investor, every future broadcast partner who is currently watching how this league treats its most visible asset, the commissioner's silence is not just a failure of empathy, it is a failure of basic institutional self-preservation. You do not let the player who is responsible for a historic surge in your league's visibility get targeted night after night and then issue a written statement and go hide, and expect the people with money and power to keep showing up for you. I want to be direct with every single person watching this video. The accusation on the table is not that the WNBA is intentionally trying to drive Caitlin Clark out. The accusation is more damning than that. The accusation is that the people running this league are so disconnected from their players, so absent from the relationships that would allow them to actually manage a crisis, and so unwilling to exercise visible, consequential leadership when it is most needed, that they have created a situation where the most important player in their league's history is essentially on her own. Night after night, hit after hit, statement after statement that says nothing and changes nothing, and the old guard voices who are pushing back on the idea of special protections for Clark, the ones invoking bubble wrap, the ones saying the rule is already in place, so what more do you want? Those voices are not making a basketball argument. They are making a political argument. They are protecting a narrative, and the narrative they are protecting is collapsing in real time. Here is the second receipt, and I want you to hear it in the exact words it was delivered, because this is the moment the accountability argument becomes impossible to dismiss. The people who have been closest to this situation, the analysts, the former coaches on television, they are not just criticizing Engelbert's communication strategy. They are saying the statement she issued is not enough. A statement is just a piece of paper. Those are the exact words being used, and the demand being made is not complicated. Be present, be visible, get on a flight, show up at the game, talk to the media. Say with a strong physical and verbal presence that this is not what is supposed to happen. And here are the specific things we are doing to protect our players. Here is the exact framing that was put on the table by someone who has been inside this league as a coach and knows what accountability from the top is supposed to look like. A statement is just a piece of paper, said directly by someone who has been in these rooms. That is the verdict on what Cathy Engelbert delivered on the most consequential night of her tenure as commissioner. Not leadership, not accountability, not presence. A piece of paper and then silence. There is no spin to put on that. None. Let me now tell you exactly what I believe happens next, because the trajectory of this situation is not hard to read if you are willing to look at it clearly. First, the officiating crisis does not resolve itself. The freedom of motion rule change is already in effect, and it is already generating controversy because it is being applied inconsistently. Coaches across this league, not just coaches who are losing games, but coaches who are winning games, are filing complaints about officiating and hearing nothing back. That is the specific accusation being made by people with direct coaching experience. We submit plays, we do not hear anything back. The chain of command for officiating accountability in this league is broken, and the two upcoming breaks, the All-Star break and the 2-week FIBA window, are the last realistic opportunities for the league to demonstrate, with actionable items and visible structural changes, that they are taking the officiating crisis seriously. If those windows pass without concrete announcements about how the officiating review process is being reformed, the credibility gap between the league office and the people actually playing and coaching in this league becomes permanent. Second, Cathy Engelbert's position becomes untenable. I am not saying she gets fired tomorrow. I am saying that the specific failure we are documenting in this video, the refusal to speak to media on the night when her voice was most needed, the absence of a relationship with the people in her league, the cascade of impossible situations she has created for coaches and players, by failing to set a clear ethical standard and enforce it with consequences. That failure is now on the record. It is documented, and every subsequent incident, every subsequent night where a player gets targeted and the league office says nothing meaningful, adds another layer to the case that the person at the top is not equipped to manage what this league has become. Third, and this is the prediction that the establishment absolutely does not want to hear, the conversation about Caitlin Clark's long-term future in the WNBA does not go away, it gets louder. The financial reality is not complicated. Clark has resources. Clark has options. Clark has leverage that no player in the history of this league has ever had at this stage of their career. And every single night that the league office fails to demonstrate that it will protect her, not with bubble wrap, not with written statements, but with visible, consequential, institutional accountability, is another night that the calculation about whether staying in this league is worth it gets slightly more complicated. Now, I want to be completely clear about something, because I think it matters for how we understand this situation. This is not about saying Caitlin Clark is perfect. She is not. She is a first-year professional who is still developing her game, still learning how to be a leader in a professional locker room, still figuring out the parts of her game that need to improve, just like every other player who has ever entered this league at any level. That is not the argument. The argument is that what is happening to her has nothing to do with basketball. The targeting, the hostility, the social media toxicity, the death threats being directed at other players who are perceived as her antagonists, none of that is a basketball conversation. It is a governance conversation. It is a leadership conversation. And the person responsible for that conversation is Cathy Engelbert. Here is the third and final receipt. And this one I want you to hear because it is the most actionable statement in this entire conversation. The one that tells you exactly what the minimum standard of accountability looks like. In the words of someone who has sat in a coaching chair and understands what it means to be responsible for the people under your leadership. The demand being made is not abstract. It is specific. It is measurable. And it is the exact opposite of what Cathy Engelbert delivered. The officiating has not met the level and caliber of the athletes in front of them. Said directly, by a former head coach who knows exactly what she is talking about. These athletes are bigger, faster, and more talented than they have ever been in the history of this league. And the officiating structure, the accountability structure, the entire governance apparatus above the court has not kept pace. That is the indictment. That is what the silence from the commissioner's office looks like from the inside of the league. And the slippage, as she said, gets more noticeable by the day. Let me bring this home, because I think there is something important that gets lost when this conversation becomes purely about Caitlin Clark as an individual. The stakes here are not just about one player. They are about what kind of league the WNBA wants to be in its next chapter. This league was built on 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears from players who fought for every dollar, every arena, every television contract, every ounce of public attention. Players who loved this game so much, they played for wages that would make their NBA counterparts laugh, in arenas that were sometimes half empty, in a media environment that ignored them for decades. That foundation is real. That history is sacred. And what is being asked of the leadership of this league right now is not complicated. It is not a demand for special treatment for one player. It is a demand for the same ethical standard, the same visible, consequential accountability that the league has always claimed as its identity. You cannot say this league stands for inclusivity and unity and the love of the game and then go silent when your most visible player is being targeted and your other players are receiving death threats. You cannot say those things and then issue a piece of paper. The gap between the values this league claims and the behavior of its leadership right now is the story. That gap is what every single person watching this video is reacting to. And that gap will not close with written statements. Caitlin Clark is on the court right now. She is taking the hits. She is showing up to every game. She is doing her job at the highest level she is capable of, in the most hostile environment a rookie has ever navigated in the modern era of this sport. She is doing it without the institutional backing she deserves. She is doing it while the people who run this league hide from cameras and issue press releases. And she is doing it in a way that makes it impossible for even her most committed critics to deny that she belongs here. That she is, right now, in real time, becoming one of the most important players this league has ever seen. The old guard can be angry about that. The establishment can resist it. The people who have been most hostile to her presence can keep looking for ways to frame the conversation that minimize what she is doing and what she represents. But the numbers do not lie. The attendance does not lie. The television ratings do not lie. And the silence from the commissioner's office, the most revealing silence in the history of this league, does not lie either. Here is the forced choice I am putting to every single person watching this video right now, and I want you to answer it in the comments because the answer matters. Do you believe Cathy Engelbert should have shown up at that game, stood in front of cameras, and addressed this situation directly? Or do you believe the written statement was sufficient leadership for the moment the WNBA was facing? That is the question. Not whether you like Caitlin Clark. Not whether you think the old guard has a point. Not whether you think the freedom of motion rule was the right call. The question is about leadership. The question is about whether the person at the top of this league is doing her job. And I genuinely want to know where you stand. Drop it in the comments. Be specific. Because this conversation is not going away, and the people who run this league need to understand that the fans who have been watching, the ones who have been here for 30 years and the ones who just arrived because of Caitlin Clark, they are all watching the same thing. They are all seeing the same gap, and they are all waiting for the same accountability. This is Rimrun. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we are not done documenting this story, and the next chapter is coming faster than the league office is prepared for.